We're talking about what's been going on with the new buyer-broker agreements and how that is affecting the real estate industry.
Generally, not a lot has changed. So agents are getting buyer-broker agreements signed, and for the most part, most listing agents and sellers are offering cooperating broker compensation because that's the most effective, efficient way to get under contract and buy and sell homes. However, because of the changes, we are seeing some very unique problems that are only due to having new forms and new rules. Realtors have a lot of protection with certain forms. There are other forms that don't give realtors any protection whatsoever. If you're a buyer out there using a form, you have to really know what form your realtor is giving you to sign.
Couple of questions. Number one is, if an agent from my office wants to show one of my listings, they happen to be showing their listing down the street, they see my listing, they call me up, can I show this buyer that I'm showing my listing to your listing? Do they need an agreement?
Listing agents should not be going out there telling their sellers that they're going to get them a better deal by negotiating the buyer-broker compensation.
Welcome to Making Money with Laura Sanders, a name you can trust. With over 20 years of real estate experience and selling over 150 homes a year, Laura Sanders is the #1 RE/MAX agent in the state of Florida for 2021. Join us each week as we discuss how to make money through buying and flipping homes to renting versus selling and everything in between. To join the conversation, call in live 888-994-4995, Studio A.
Hi everyone, I'm Laura Sanders with Making Money with Laura Sanders, and I am your host, Laura Sanders. That's pretty good. It makes sense that I would be the host if I'm Laura Sanders. Anyway, every week we talk about something that will help you make a little money, save a little money, or maybe just help you navigate the crazy world that we live in. Today we're here with CJ from JK Closings, and Charles Esposito. We're talking about what's been going on with the new buyer-broker agreements and how that is affecting the real estate industry. Though, just to add a little bit extra, I heard from somebody today telling me that if we think the buyer-broker agreement's creating havoc in the world, AI is really going to create havoc in our world. And I don't know if you've heard anything about that, but...
Oh, yeah. Well, AI is definitely going to affect a lot of different industries. So we're waiting to see how it's going to affect ours.
Yeah.
You know, the way I always think about it is technology is a tool. So some people get worried about being replaced by AI, but they're just going to be replaced by the people who are better at using AI, probably.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I better start now.
Yeah, exactly. Learn how to use AI.
I just figured out how to use email. No, I'm just kidding. So it's been about 6 weeks since we went to the buyer-broker agreement. And I wanted to hear, like, what's going on your side over there in the industry of law and title.
Yeah, we're seeing a few different things. I would say overall, just generally, not a lot has changed. So agents are getting buyer-broker agreements signed, and for the most part, most listing agents and sellers are offering cooperating broker compensation because that's the most effective, efficient way to get under contract and buy and sell homes. However, because of the changes, we are seeing some very unique problems that are only due to having new forms and new rules. One of the issues that we're seeing is agents filling out the wrong forms. I had a listing agent fill out a form saying that they were compensating the buyer's broker, except their listing agreement said that they were not offering cooperating broker compensation from the seller. So basically the seller agreed to pay the agents 3%. And then, no, just the listing agent. And so their listing agreement said 3%, and then they said, I want you to negotiate with the buyer's agent. So then they negotiated with the buyer's agent. They agreed that the seller was going to pay 2%. And then they filled out the form stating that the listing broker...
so they had to give it from their 3%.
So, yeah, so the long story short, the listing broker agreed to 3% with the seller and then took from their 3% and gave 2% to the buyer's broker. So the buyer's broker ended up getting paid 2% from the listing agent and then 1% from the buyer, and then the listing agent on paper only had 1%.
And the seller wouldn't go back and...
Nope, they didn't agree to do that.
But I thought you said that the seller did agree to pay.
the seller told the listing agent to negotiate it with the buyer's agent, and then because the listing agent used the wrong form, the seller just never had to sign anything else, and they ended up closing. And I didn't actually do this closing. I was called in to review everything, and the forms said that the seller was paying 3, the listing broker was paying 2, and the buyer was paying 1. That's what all of the forms said. So the agents in that transaction didn't use the right forms, and that was a mistake that the listing agent made. And realistically, after closing, there's nothing that the seller really has to do unless they
Feel bad?
Yeah, out of the kindness of their hearts, want to pay extra money.
Yeah, I'm sure they're not going to.
In this case, they didn't agree to do that. So that was an interesting thing. We've also had buyers who have signed multiple buyer-broker agreements, so and then lied to agents about it. So I always advise agents to ask a buyer if they're working with another agent, and if they are, well, what form did they sign? It shouldn't prevent a buyer from working with that agent, because you can have multiple agreements. You can have them for territories, you can have them for specific properties. There's a lot of different agreements that can be signed, but we have seen buyers enter into 2 exclusive buyer-broker agreements. So for instance, if you agree with an agent that you're going to have them look for property in Florida, and let's say it's residential property, and then you sign an agreement with them for a year, if you buy any residential property in Florida for the next year, you're obligated to pay them whatever is on that agreement. So we've had buyers sign multiple agreements with agents stating that exact same thing.
So now,
And then the agents find out about it, and they could potentially sue the buyer.
but what happens, like, if you were to do that, right? Like, I guess my question is, as an agent, what would you do if you were the agent? Would you make them pay you?
It depends on how much money it is. I think that magic breaking point for an agent is usually over $10,000 in commission, because if first of all, you have to be on the same page with your broker. It's the broker. All of these agreements are with the broker. So even though you, Laura Sanders, are an agent, you're signing the agreement with your client, your broker is authorizing you to sign those agreements. So if your broker says they want to go after that commission, then that's their obligation, or that's their prerogative. If they say they don't want to go after it, then there's nothing that you as the agent can do, because your broker's not
Even
going
though
after
it's
it.
my gas, my time.
Yeah. So these agreements, even though they're supposed to be for consumer protection, and that's the nature of the lawsuit, realistically, the consumers are getting themselves into issues by signing these agreements. And some of them are going to get sued for it. As an agent, my recommendation to agents is always to get your lender involved in the transaction before you show property to a buyer that's going to be financing. And there's another reason. One of those reasons is because if that buyer ends up working with your lender that you know and trust, and they use another agent to buy a house, your lender's going to tell you that. That's how one agent found out that their client was cheating on them, basically. And they breached that agreement, and that broker can sue the buyer.
So let's say, though, for instance, you have a cancellation fee in your buyer-broker agreement, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm just going through all these what-ifs, because let me just tell you, a lot of these what-ifs happen. Yeah. And now the buyer decides that they want to fire you. Mm-hmm. Because they all have reasons they want to fire you, right? Yeah. Can they go back and write a bad review about you because you charged them for that cancellation?
Yeah, well, I mean, anyone can give you a review for anything, and if it's truthful, they don't have to take it down. If it's not truthful, there's ways that you can, get reviews taken down, whether it's Google or Facebook or anything like that. I guess there's 2 parts to this. If you're using an exclusive buyer-broker agreement, the one that is put out by the Florida Bar and the Florida Realtors, buyer's agents, just like listing agents on a listing agreement, do not have to cancel these agreements. So if you do decide to terminate it, it would be a conditional termination. What are those conditions? Well, usually you say, well, buyer, if you want me to let you out of this agreement, I need you to pay me. Why? Because we're looking at tons of property. I've done all of this research. I'm working for you. So if you want to cancel, pay me. Otherwise, continue forward and keep looking for a house. And that's one of the conditions. One of the other conditions is, let's say the buyer is lying about whether or not they want to purchase a home. Mm-hmm. So usually buyers will say, I don't want to buy anymore. let me out of this agreement. So buyer's agent lets them out of the agreement, and then they find out that that buyer bought with another agent a couple weeks later.
Why even let them out if they're not buying?
Exactly.
Say, listen, it's going to run its course.
Exactly. Why let
Come
them
back
out of
to
the
me when
agreement if you're
yeah.
not going to buy? There's a lot of different reasons why not to let a buyer out of a buyer-broker agreement. But let's say you do and you conditionally terminate it. One of those conditions is that if they purchase a home during the regular term of your agreement, or what would have been the regular term of your agreement, you still get your compensation. So they can't just cancel it, go buy a house with somebody else that they were supposed to buy with you. You can actually void the conditional termination. So realtors have a lot of protection with certain forms. There are other forms that don't give realtors any protection whatsoever. So if you're a buyer out there using a form, you have to really know what form your realtor is giving you to sign. So I have gotten a few calls from buyers asking for advice as to what forms to sign. And, some of them tell me, oh, I only want to look at this one property with this agent. I don't want to be bound to them for any other property.
Right.
And then they show me the form that the agent gave them, and it's an exclusive buyer-broker agreement for a year for the entire state of Florida. And then I have to tell the buyer, well, unfortunately, that's not what this form does. And then they get mad at their agent because they feel like the agent is not being forthcoming with them and truthful about what agreement they're having them sign. So it's really important for agents to understand the differences between the forms and what their client wants.
You know what? We're going to go to a commercial break. When we come back, I want to know why should we only sign for one house? Like, we're doing that time. Like, what you're using us? That's not fair. So when we come back, let's talk about what is fair and what's not fair. So stay tuned. We're going to go to commercial. We'll be right back.
Whether you're buying, selling, refinancing, or building your dream home, you have a lot riding on your loan specialist. Max Fish, a top 1% mortgage loan officer in the nation, will give you a same-day qualifying quote. Max Fish is committed to providing his customers with mortgage services that exceed their expectations, ensuring that you make the right choice for you and your family is his ultimate goal. Contact Max Fish today at 954-729-6933 or max.fisch@nwmcorp.net.
At JK Closing Attorneys, we do all of the same things that a title company does, but with the benefits of being a law office. We can help with residential real estate, short sales, commercial real estate, refinances, 1031 exchanges, and FIRPTA withholding.
Contact JK Closing Attorneys today at 954-332-3111. Again, that is 954-332-3111.
You have been watching Making Money with Laura. For more information, contact Laura Sanders at 954-650-0827 or visit her website at laurasell.com. And now back to the show.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Making Money with Laura Sanders, and I am your host, Laura Sanders. I'm here with attorney Charles Esposito. He is from JK Closings. We are talking about the new craze with the buyer-broker agreement and what that means for us. We're talking about, signing these buyer-broker agreements, how long the term can be. I mean, it can be as short as 5 days, but as long as, I don't know if it can go over a year.
Yeah.
I guess it could go whatever you want to put on there, but
yeah, I recommended that an agent do a 2-year agreement one time because
that's how long it took me to sell my OBU.
There are a lot of buyers that take a long time to find the property that they want, but in this particular case, they had a client that was looking to rent or buy, and then they stay
in a lease.
Right. Well, if you rent for a year, why can't you continue working with that agent to find a house that you want to buy 9 months from now?
Right.
So why wouldn't you sign a 2-year agreement to lock yourself in?
Right.
So to your point for agents, why would you agree to, a form that only has you looking at one property that's very short term? Maybe that client is somebody that you don't know yet. You get a call off the internet and they want to go look at a house. Maybe they're not comfortable signing a long-term agreement. The 3 different forms that came out from Florida Realtors, I call the marriage agreement, the dating agreement, and the let me buy you coffee agreement. The marriage agreement is the exclusive buyer-broker agreement. It says you're only working with me for whatever the term is and for the types of property. The dating agreement is just for specific properties. It could be for one property, it could be for multiple properties. And then the Let's Get Coffee agreement is an agreement that's just for one or for showing properties in general, but it doesn't obligate the buyer to pay anything. And I don't recommend that any agent use that agreement.
Yeah, let me go back. So it
So-
doesn't obligate the buyer to pay.
Yeah.
So that means that you're going to be their tour guide.
As an agent, yep.
Right. And if you make an offer on a house and the seller says, and can agents
Well,
ask you what you have?
You wouldn't, agents can ask you that, but you don't have to answer that.
Okay,
So a
good.
listing agent can ask about all of your agreements and you don't have to answer them. Just like a listing
I had an agent
agent
ask
doesn't
me
have
for
to
my
give you the
listing
listing
agreement the other day. I was
Yeah,
like, yeah, I'm
you
not
don't need
sending
to
my
give that.
listing agreement.
So with this agreement, and the one that we're talking about is called a touring agreement or a pre-touring agreement, you wouldn't be making an offer on behalf of that client until that client signed a different agreement with you. So you'd be allowed to show them the property, but you wouldn't do any other work for them without them signing an agreement agreeing that you're going to get paid. So again, I don't recommend any agents use that agreement. But there are specific circumstances where it might make sense. Maybe there's a family member flying in from out of town and you have to show them the property. One of the things that came out of this NAR settlement is that agents have to sign an agreement with anyone that they show property to.
Right.
So if you're looking for a house and your friend is flying in from out of town and they want to go look at it with you, the agent has to sign an agreement with you, even though you're from out of town and you're not interested in buying that property. It's now a violation if you show that property to anyone.
$1,000, right?
Yep. First fine, $1,000.
So let's just say though, okay, couple of questions. Number one is if an agent from my office wants to show one of my listings, they happen to be showing their listing down the street, they see my listing, they call me up, can I show this buyer that I'm showing my listing to your listing? Do they need an agreement?
They should have an agreement because they're a different agent and it's not their listing. Even though your listing agreement is with your broker, if they are showing a different buyer, then they should absolutely have an agreement. Now
Okay.
you as the listing agent, if it's your listing, you don't have to have an agreement signed with a buyer that walks into your property. You're allowed to show that property.
But
you
you
don't
were
represent
saying-
the buyer at that point. The agent that you're talking about is talking about representing a buyer and showing them property. So it's a little bit different.
So what do you recommend if somebody calls off my listing to see? What do you recommend, or any realtor?
As a
what do you
listing
recommend
agent,
for us to do?
So as a listing agent, you're allowed to show your property, and I would recommend showing the property. But I also would recommend if that buyer is not represented by a buyer's agent, I would have them sign a showing agreement, which obligates them to make sure that you earn the commission or the compensation from the buyer side. And then I also would take it a step further, and I would recommend that you have other properties that are like your listing that you show them as well. So you have multiple properties that are just like your listing. You can say, hey, I had to do all of this research on my listing. I know what's out there. I know what's comparable. Why don't I show you those properties as well? Then you can develop a client that way.
So at that point, they're just signing. Let's say it one more time. They're not signing the
They
exclusive.
don't have to sign anything, but I would recommend that they sign a showing agreement.
Right, but when they but if they don't sign the showing agreement, I can't show them the other properties. Correct.
Right. You cannot show them other properties without having them sign something. They can sign a buyer-broker agreement, a showing agreement, a property pre-touring agreement. The point is buyers have to sign some agreement before they are shown properties that you are not listing.
This is
Yeah.
and.
The days of buyers agents working for free are over.
But are
It's-
they? Because when
I
they
think
say
that
they
they
want to
are.
fire you, and you've showed them 14 houses,
Mm-hmm.
been through inspections, they've canceled deals, and then they want to fire you because they're mad for
Yeah.
no reason. What happens? What do you do?
If you have an exclusive buyer-broker agreement with them, you don't have to terminate that agreement. You can put in there a fee. So for instance, if your buyer, before you sign an agreement with them, tells you that they're looking for $800,000 property in Broward County, with or without a pool, that could be a substantial amount of properties. Whether it's in a community or not, you might be doing a preliminary search and realize there's 20 different houses that might fit their criteria. So in building your buyer broker agreement, you may say, okay, it's going to be a year-long agreement, and if they cancel early, I want to get paid $5,000. So you write that in the agreement. And now if they want to cancel with you after 3 months, you could say, well, the only way that I'm canceling with you is if you pay me $5,000 because we looked at 20 different properties. I did a lot of work for you. And now you're just saying, oh, I don't want to buy anymore. Why? You know, it's a contract and it's an agreement that they're signing and you are not working for free.
Right.
You know, there are different forms. So again, that form doesn't have to be used, but you're not going to use a showing agreement if you're going to look at 20 different properties. It doesn't make sense.
Right.
A property pre-touring agreement. You're not
That
going to take
definitely
a
wouldn't
client.
make sense.
Right. I mean, agents shouldn't be using that at all, but you're definitely not going to use it if you're going to look at 20 different properties.
Right.
You know, so buyer's agents, again, the days of buyer's agents working for free are done. Now, buyers may think that they're going to get a better deal by going to the listing agent directly, but why would they? Why would a buyer think that if they go to the listing agent, that listing agent is just going to work on their behalf against the clients that they signed an agreement with? That also doesn't necessarily make any sense.
So let's go and let's talk about that because we're going to run out of time, but let's talk about that real quick. So if I sign, okay, so if somebody calls off my listing, they want to see it, but now let's say they're expecting the commission back. So now we can make them where they're not being represented by you. You've written the contract for them.
Yeah.
But you're not representing them. How does that work?
If you just have the listing side and you're not the cooperating broker side, it means your seller is paying you and you're not obligated to do any work on behalf of the buyer whatsoever. You know, so you don't have to monitor their inspection dates, you don't have to monitor their loan approval period. You're not working for them. You're not getting paid by them.
Do we need to tell them specifically? Because they might think that we are.
You do not need to disclose that you're not working for them because they're not signing an agreement with you. Now, your broker may have a form like that, but it's not your obligation to tell someone that you never signed an agreement with that you're not working for them. There are some brokers that will not allow their agents, their listing agents, to write up the contract, though. So that's something that you have to check with your broker about as well, because writing up a contract sometimes is seen as working on behalf of the buyer.
But you could be working on behalf of the seller.
You could be working, I would argue
and-
that you're working on behalf of the seller.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is there are some brokers out there that don't want their listing agents
Right.
doing that.
Well, what's
Yeah.
a good way for, obviously, I mean, I don't know if you've had sellers or buyers ask you to look over their buyer broker agreements.
Yes.
You have, okay.
Yeah, I have, and I do look over them. I look over those for free, and I also give recommendations to buyers.
Not that there's
and-
much to fill in. I mean, it's not
No,
rocket science.
there's not, you know, and again, 954-779-5000, you can call or text us. We like to take, you know, screenshots if we see that of an agreement. Just like we look and review it as is contracts, we look at those buyer broker agreements, listing agreements too. You know, and you have to be careful, and you need to make sure that the agent that you're working with knows what they're doing. You know,
and you're looking to work with more agents to help them, to train them.
100%. I do this. I
and-
go and train a lot of agents. Yeah.
And you have offices, not just only, did you open in Orlando yet?
Yes, we have an office in Orlando. We're from Miami Beach all the way up to Tampa, so we're pretty much everywhere in Florida.
So what do you have, 4 offices?
No.
5?
We have
6?
13 offices.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Look
so
at
we have
you.
a lot. We have a lot of locations. We do a lot of trainings for agents and their brokers. And this buyer broker agreement has been something I've been doing a lot of trainings on, and it's still fluid.
It's been the main focus right now.
Yeah, it's still very fluid. We're learning about a lot of different scenarios that are coming up. But again, I started this off by saying generally things are pretty much the same. Listing agents and sellers are offering cooperating broker compensation. Buyers agents, more often than not, are not the ones coming out of pocket to pay their agents. It's still being included in the transaction purchase price. And that makes the most sense, market-wise.
Yeah, and it's funny, like I had somebody today said, oh, why isn't, another agent said we're going to include the closing costs for the seller into the purchase price. Like, wouldn't you're going to list a property for what it's worth.
Exactly.
I mean, you're not adding anything, because if it was worth more to add it in, you would have listed it for more.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah,
you know.
don't get cute with it. Keep it simple. You know, the price is the price. The market is the market.
yeah. And if you're looking for a top agent that can help you get the most money for your home when you're selling, definitely give me a call, Laura Sanders with RE/MAX Direct. And before we, run out of our last time, any words of wisdom to give out to our audience,
Yes, from the listing side. I would say that listing agents should not be going out there telling their sellers that they're going to get them a better deal by negotiating the buyer broker compensation. Like one way or another, it's going to be included in the purchase price. You're either going to have a lower purchase price and the buyers are paying their agents, or you're going to have a higher purchase price and the buyer's agent is getting paid out of the purchase price. If you start getting into this game where you're saying, we're going to offer 0 and then I'm going to negotiate to 2 or something like that, I think that's a very big problem for listing agents from a legal perspective, because they've signed a listing agreement that says that they're offering 0, and then all of a sudden at closing, the seller is paying the buyer broker 2%. I've seen that a lot.
Can you write, so instead of writing 0, write in there and say that the seller's willing to pay compensation, but that's to be determined by negotiations?
I would shy away from doing that, because the purpose of the NAR settlement was for the agents to disclose to their clients what they are paying at the outset of the agreement. So if you're signing a listing agreement, the seller should know what they're obligated to pay. If you're signing a buyer broker agreement, they're obligated to know what they have to pay.
So all my listings, except for one, all my listings are offering buyer broker compensation. However, except for one that I have coming up, that's over $3 million. The seller said they can negotiate their commission into the deal.
Yep. And
So-
in that case, I would do a modification for that specific agreement when it happens. And we can talk about that, but I would modify your listing agreement and I would do a seller to buyer broker compensation agreement just to cover yourself. Call that CYA.
Okay, because right now my agreement says no compensation.
Yep, and that's fine.
But once we go to contract, when I'm doing it, if we go to contract, then at that time I would modify it.
Yeah, you don't want your
This
client.
is crazy stuff.
Yeah, and this is for realtors.
I
You don't
can't
want
believe how
your
much you know
client to come
already.
back later and say, I signed a listing agreement that said 0, and then Laura negotiated me to have to pay 2. And they go to some hotshot attorney out there that says, well, looks like Laura screwed up. You want to have everything in writing.
Wow,
And so
and now
I-
you're giving them more information on the radio.
Well, listen, hey, sellers and buyers out there, if you have agents that are,
Yeah.
you think aren't acting properly, this is what this settlement is about. And there's some agents that are trying to game the system and there's a lot of bait and switch agents out there. If an agent is
It's
telling you
true.
they're going to save you money, and then later on you're closing and you're paying more money, that's bait and switch. And that's what the settlement is supposed to prevent against.
So if an agent calls, though, on your listing, right, and they say to you that you say, are you offering buyer broker compensation? And then you say, no, I'm offering 0. And they go, okay, thank you. And they hang up and never call you back again.
That's something you have to talk to sellers about. Why wouldn't you offer cooperating broker compensation? You get more buyers, you get more agents showing your property, you close faster, you get more approved buyers because they're working with an agent that's presumably researched them.
All right, and before we end our show today, real quick, so if I have a listing and I say to the other agent on the other side, the owner's not offering compensation, however, I would just make that with your buyer to make that when you make your offer, know that your buyer is going to pay you a certain amount instead of offering in the offer price.
Yep.
That would make the most sense, right?
Yes.
And that would be legal in order to not get ourselves in hot water.
Exactly. You also can have an offer that comes in with concessions. So a seller can give a concession, let's say it's 6%, and the buyer can use that towards anything on their closing costs, including their agent's compensation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for watching or listening or whatever we do. Making Money with Laura Sanders. Make it a great night. Till next week.